Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad and John, they're the ones to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
John, you like that intro, don't you?
I love the intro, and our listeners do too, Brad. That's why we brought it back by popular request.
By popular requests. We're a little bit late this morning. That's all my fault. Everything's all my fault. The temperature is causing a little bit of a problem here at Radio Ranch. We've been having some issues at Radio Ranch. It's not for the circuit breaker box, smoking, and all sorts of crazy stuff. That is John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. I'll spell it because you need to type in his name, put a John in front of it, put a .com after it, johncombest.com. Every single day for 23 plus years, he puts together a list of all the important things you should know about that's going on in the state of Missouri. Interesting stories, sometimes serious, sometimes funny, sometimes not so funny, sometimes ridiculous. They're on there. And we start the morning off with this guy right here.
I'm Casey Kasem.
And he says he's going to...
We're on our way to the number one.
Take us all the way to number one, and we start off with...
In third place.
Today we have a story, Brad, from Columbia on a topic that we haven't talked about a whole lot in the last few months. Even though it's controversial, it seems to be pretty much settled here in Missouri in many ways. And that's the subject of guns and the Second Amendment. The headline from KMIZ in Columbia, Juvenile Shots Fired Incident, highlights the ongoing issue of stolen guns in Missouri. So there have been two big high-profile incidents in Columbia. The first one involves a whole bunch of juveniles with apparently a stolen gun. And the week before that, there was another stolen gun that was used in the commission of a crime. And the folks, it turns out, ended up being, at least some of them ended up being from St. Louis, a gentleman named Antonio Williams. I'm guessing that's an Asian fella. And a guy named Tyvis Price from Jeff City. So this brings to light, Brad, the issue of stolen guns. Now, we talked about it last in the issue of St. Louis City, where a gentleman was fined for having a gun in his center console when he went to church. But a curious quote here from a former Boone County detective. And I wanted your thoughts on this, Brad, because you will probably you'll certainly remember this better than I will. This gentleman says that really Missouri lawmakers are to blame because here's his quote, because here's what he says. Ever since the state legislature loosened up all the gun laws, that's when it, really started. When I first started as a cop, you really couldn't carry a gun in your vehicle like you can now. I mean, you had to keep the ammo and the gun separate, not within proximity to each other. If you kept it in the console, all the ammo had to be in the trunk or somewhere. But now, everybody's driving around with a gun in their car. Now, Brad, my question for you is, do you remember when that law changed? Do you remember when it used to be? Because I remember my dad telling me about this, being like, you got to keep... My dad gave me advice on not keeping ammo with a firearm because of the state law. I don't remember when that changed.
Well, it's been a gradual change. They've changed a bunch of things. One of them hadn't happened. I mean, do you want me to give you a little bit of a mini dissertation on this, or what do you want?
We do have 12 minutes, so if you can keep it to probably 2 or 3 minutes, that'd be awesome.
Okay, I for one disagree with the constitutional carry thing. I think that if you're going to, I think it would be, you could say the same thing about constitutional driver. That you could say, well, I'm just, I can drive a car. I don't need a driver's license. I think you have to show some competence and some knowledge of a vehicle and driving it. The same thing with a gun. What scares me is there's a lot of people that have bought guns that have no idea what they're doing with the gun, and they don't take any instruction. If you go, there's lots of people around still, even though you don't have to take the concealed carry course anymore, there's lots of very experienced gun trainers, whatever you want to call them. You go to any of the range, the one out in West County, out in Baldwin near you, the Range West. There's a new chain that's come into St. Louis, Range USA, which is like they're all over the country. These are really good people that work there, and they'll teach you all this kind of stuff. But the deal on this was, you're right, it's still the way it is in Illinois, that if I don't have a concealed carry in Illinois, and if I want to carry my gun in Illinois, I have to do the same thing. You have to take the gun and you have to put it someplace, and you have to put it in like some kind of a locked container or something like that, and you have to put the ammunition someplace else, which does real well if you get carjacked. You say, hey guys, hold on a minute. My gun's in the trunk and my ammunition's in the glove box. Let me get my gun out of the trunk. Let me load it up, and I'm going to fight back with you guys. It's just sort of weird. And the thing that bothers me is I would never, ever, 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 ever leave a gun in a car. I mean,
why would you, Brad?
Well, I don't, these people that drive around with guns in the center console, why do you think they have so much problem at the parking lots around Busch Stadium and
right.
at the Blues games? Because people know, the bad guys know, well, there are people coming downtown and they got their gun with them, but they can't get through the metal detectors at Busch, so they got their gun in their, under their seat or in their console in the glove box. We'll just break those windows out with our little glass breakers that we bought, for $10 that shatters all those side windows, which are real expensive to replace. And we'll just rummage through the car and holy cow, we found a gun. I don't agree with what he's saying. I to a certain extent, I know the action he's going on this. He's saying, well, now it's to the point where everybody's got a gun in the car. That's not true. But I have friends of mine that carry guns in their cars, and I tell them, I say, that's not a good thing. I just don't agree with it. But I don't agree with what he's saying.
You're saying, yeah.
I don't agree with what he's saying. I mean, once again, what he's saying is essentially because of the fact they changed the law, everybody's got a gun, which is not true. But there's more guns out there than used to be. I mean, that's just the way it is. And the problem now is, well, it's gotten better. For a while during the pandemic thing, you could not find any ammunition. It was just gone. It just didn't.
It was a great time for munition salespeople,
well,
for sure.
Now the problem is there's I'm on a couple different sites and I get messages, hey, you can buy a 500 pail of 9mm for only $89.95. You go like, damn, 3 years ago that would have been $895. You know what I'm saying?
Hey, it's kind of it's the glut in guns and cannabis, Brad. There's just so much of it out there.
Well, you know what? I think you should be able to see. Now, here's an interesting question: can you take your gun into a cannabis store?
I'm not sure, Brad. I think if you pointed at someone and say, give me all your cash, you can't do it.
Well, I mean,
but otherwise, I think you can.
They've got so many exclusions. You can't take it into a place.
You're right about that. That's a great question.
You can't take it into a place of worship. You can't take it into a government building. You can't do this. You can't take it on Metrolink where you need it the most. You know what I mean?
When you should make a note of that because when we have hookers for heroin, or excuse me, heroin for, I forgot our campaign name, Brad, but we need to make sure that when you go in and you go to a heroin store and you go to get a little bit of opium, a little bit of opiates, that you can't bring your gun in, because that would feel very unsafe running my dispensary. John, if a bunch of guys had 9mm pointing.
We have three new campaigns. The original one that you came up with, Escorts for Education, which is the legalization.
Yeah, that's important.
Legalization,
AKA Hot for Teacher.
Right, legalization of prostitution. Then there's the Meth for Math, which all the meth sales will go to reinforce the math teachers. We'll hire more math teachers. And the third one is heroin. What was it again? Heroin for.
I don't know. Maybe we can make it heroin for history.
Heroin for history. Yeah, heroin for history, where we'll hire more history teachers with the money we make off the heroin sales.
Hey, you know what history teachers can talk about? Story number 2, Brad.
Up a notch to number 2.
Brad, for the second day in a row, I think it's important that we remember our progressive friends because they're having a hard time with the events of yesterday. KCUR in Kansas City had an uplifting piece yesterday about how determined progressive activists are. Even though they're sad, they're very determined, Brad, to keep doing what they're doing. And this woman, Salisa Halakal, looks like she's an Asian woman. I believe she's from New York, who, of course, is now at KCUR until she leaves soon, I'm sure. But she went out and interviewed, kind of typical check all your boxes for people who are supposed to dislike Trump. So she got a gal that works with illegal immigrants, who she's interviewed before. KCUR has profiled this woman before. She's with the Advocates for Immigration Rights and Reconciliation. She went and talked to a guy that's head of a trans women of color group. They're called Transformations KC. So she talked to that guy who calls himself Marique Jensen. So she did the other thing. She checked a few other boxes. She talked to some big fat black gal who's mad about Trump and everything. And there was another rally in Kansas City that drew, I counted in the video, Brad, they drew nearly 24 people to their anti-Trump rally. So that's pretty good. If you can get, somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 people on a cold day, that's not bad. So protests continued throughout the state of Missouri, Brad. And, our progressive friends we remember how hard it was for them in 2017 at the initial Trump swearing in. And Trump had some strong words yesterday, and I'm sure it's hard for them to process it.
Man, I'm just going to move right along to number one. I'm not going to touch that one.
The number one.
Donald Trump's inauguration yesterday, Brad. I'm sure many of our listeners either watched it or listened to it. I made Brad Hildebrand proud because I was driving in my car and I listened to it on the radio like it was the 1950s, listening to a news event on the radio. And I would point out, Brad, that on my website today, the top links are about Donald Trump's executive orders, not because they have anything to do with Missouri legislation or Missouri policy, but our friend Will Scharf is right there up on stage with Donald Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, as Trump signs a plethora of executive orders. It's so great to see Will Scharf up there on stage with President Trump. And those are our top links today, Brad, from JohnComvest.com.
Who's calling me at this time in the morning? I would normally answer the phone, but John gets mad at me when I do that. Okay, that's it for the top three?
That is, yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the inauguration yesterday. I was out running errands yesterday and in and out of the car, and listening to the point where, how do you think that Biden and Kamala Harris felt sitting there when he's essentially excoriating everything they stood for? I mean,
that's the best possible word, Brett. And I thought the exact same thing. And in fact, I thought it was just, I thought most of them were punchlines. And to your point, Brett, I just pictured, again, because I was listening on the radio, I was picturing what Kamala, and Joe doesn't know what's going on, but what Obama and especially Kamala must have been thinking and reacting. I interrupted you. You were talking.
No. That's fine. You're just reinforcing what I was saying. I mean, let's talk about a guy who, in the old days, we would talk about a guy who had a deep voice. He would have to carry around certain parts of his anatomy in a wheelbarrow, if you know what I'm saying. Okay.
Yeah.
So when he walked down the street, he had a wheelbarrow underneath him. That was Trump yesterday. I mean, the guy has some sphericals, if you know what I'm saying. And
it was very in your face. And what I like about it is what he said yesterday is exactly what he said throughout the entire campaign. And it's not like he's getting up there and giving some bland pablum about we need to unite and everybody's great. He's talking about exactly what he's going to do.
Well, the interesting thing for me was, let's make a comparison between what's going to happen with Trump and what happened with Biden. You had Mayorkas, who, when he was questioned in the Senate hearing, in the congressional hearing, remember his famous comment?
I don't. What was it?
The 4 words he said: "The border is secure." The border,
exactly.
Yeah, and that's like Tashara Jones getting on, radio and TV in the morning and go, "Hey, come to the city. Streets are clear. No crime. It's a great place to be." People
it's like
go.
Jennifer Wyshitsky saying the weather is warm.
Yeah, well, it's to the point where everybody's doing the eye roll going, "What? The streets aren't clear."
Yeah.
Matter of fact, talking about that, did you hear that they signed contracts, was it yesterday, with private snow clearing companies, private snowplow companies to come into the city?
Yeah, Brett, we talked about that either on Friday or on Monday.
That's crazy.
And not to interrupt, but remember the whole, I don't know if you remember the whole tip of the thing was that Comptroller Darlene Green came out and said, "Hey, we got to do something about this. I want us to be able to hire snowplows." And Tashara essentially said, "Yeah, it was my idea. Already thought of it." And it's like, I don't know.
Then I saw another report on the lady who is in charge of the streets in the city of St. Louis. And I think we even talked about that last week as well, too, where she's now saying, "My staff didn't communicate to me how bad the streets were." I mean,
I sent that quote to you because I said the finger pointing begins about this.
I mean, like, she doesn't have a car. Remember, who was it that I heard on the radio?
It was Mark. It was on the Reardon Roundtable, and it was former alderman, former state rep Donna Baringer, and she said, do they not own a car?
Well,
can they not drive around and look?
Somebody said that under was it the Slay administration? I think they were
The
saying
buckets of salt, yeah.
Well, but
and you were required to drive around.
yes, they divided the city up into sectors, and each one of the administrators in the city in the mayor's office was assigned a sector where they're supposed to drive and report back to the mayor. Since they say, okay, in Baden, Broadway looks pretty good, but the side streets are pretty bad, and they're supposed to give a report. So here's this woman who's in charge of the street department who's essentially saying her staff didn't tell her, like she's chained to her desk. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And you know what? And that's another thing that Donna Baringer pointed out was that under the Slay administration, folks would go out and Brad, this is a man after your heart, a man who got in the truck, and I forgot what the gentleman's name was. I don't know if Donna even mentioned it, but he would be in the truck at 2 or 3 in the morning, checking on streets, driving a plow, because that was his job. And Donna Baringer didn't say this, but if you're in charge of city streets, there's probably, you can count on 2 hands the number of days where you got to get your you-know-what out of bed early and be out there. You know what I'm saying? Well, like out of 365 days of the year, you got to do that, 7 or 8 days out of the year?
So, John, for once in your life, you're agreeing with me with the hands-on approach of management, the management by actually walking around and watching what your employees are doing. You know what I'm saying?
Management by driving around.
Right.
Yeah. And look, here's the thing. As long as I wouldn't do it for streets. I would be Herb Keller, and I would make sure that the Southwest Stewardess' skirts were short enough.
Here we go.
I think that's what he was best known for.
John,
but yeah, if you're in charge of city streets, you gotta make sure the plows are out there.
John, you keep making fun of one of my idols. I love Herb Kelleher. I'm sad that Southwest Airlines is going to hell in a handbasket with all the crazy stuff they're doing now. I'm sad that he died. I wish he lived to be 130 years old. He's one of those guys. Once again, I read that book a long time ago. The book was called Nuts. And fascinating book. It's like,
and he is joined, Brett. I'm sorry to bring us down, but you know what music legend died in the last 48 hours?
I was going to say Mark Cuban, but Bob Cuban died.
Bob Cuban passed away. I think the trend is if we mention an old-timey singer on the show, you should probably start making arrangements.
Or just any old-timey person on the show?
Yeah. Rest in peace, Jim White. Is he dead yet?
Jim White's been dead for 20 years, I think.
Oh, okay. Rest in peace, to Jim White.
Okay, we have to take a break. Poor Jim White. You make fun of Jim. You never listened to Jim White, did you?
No, absolutely not. Brad, I'm under the age of 70. I don't know who Jim White is.
Okay, we have to take a break. Yeah, well, I'm pushing 90, so I can say things like that. Okay.